Hello, it's Sunday afternoon and it's time to start our regular weekend walk of the Old Town. It's a gorgeous day today, -1 Celsius, but no wind and very sunny, which makes it a great day for a walk. And it's the third day of the national lockdown, but there is no limit on how much time one can spend outside, so let's do the walk. I am on the Mother-in-Law Bridge, which connects the two parts of the Old Town. The one which is in front of you, you can see the colonnade and this grand mansion. That's the area where the main sites are. And the second part of the Old Town, which is over there. It's much more off the beaten path, and that's the area we're going to explore during our virtual walk today. We're gonna head towards that tower. Let me zoom in. And this gray Soviet building, which at the Soviet times was called a poster to communism. And once we get there, I'm gonna explain to you why it was called this way. Here's the Black Sea and the Bay of Odessa. This part of the bay is called the Wheat Harbor. In front of you are the wheat silos. Wheat is the #1 commodity which has been exported from the port. The harbor appeared during the Soviet times in 1950s. And if I zoom in, let me zoom in. The buildings on the other side of the bay are the city of Odessa, the new districts. To buy a property down there is twice cheaper than to buy an apartment, for example, in a new building over here. There's a fun story which explains why this bridge is called the Mother-in-Law Bridge. It's the only so-called modern bridge in the Old Town, which was built in 1967 in the Soviet time. And that year was a very important year in the Soviet history. That's when the Soviets were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. So to commemorate the occasion, the city decided to build the bridge. But the locals knew the real reason. The mayor of the city at that time lived on the boulevard, which was over there on the other side of the cliff behind this grand building. His mother-in-law lived on the other side of the plateau. She was a good cook. He visited her often. He wanted a shortcut. So he used that anniversary as an excuse to use the city funds to build the bridge. That's why when its construction was finished, people called it the Mother-in-Law Bridge. In the early 1800s, instead of this wheat harbor, there was the local beach area. No sand. Like over there where you see the silos and these buildings, the sea was a little bit closer, so this was the coastline. And over there were the gazebos which people could rent, and the gazebos had the steps which people could use to get into the sea. That's how people went for a swim in the old days. Up until 8 years ago, the gates of this bridge, like on the left and on the right, were packed with the locks. It's an international tradition which is very popular in Western Europe, in Central Europe, and it's popular here. When people get married, they come to the bridge and they put a lock on the gates. And then sometime later, the city officials come and cut the locks off because it's not good for the bridge. Here's another view on the area. And then finally they put this heart where people could put locks instead of the gates of the bridge. Here's a small place to get coffee or tea. Restaurants and cafes are closed because of the national lockdown. They can work only for takeaways. But grocery stores, food markets are open. This spot is called the Corner of Old Odessa. It appeared in 1970s and was created by the locals who were concerned that the old town was losing an authentic look and feel. So they walked around different areas of the old town, gathered artifacts which belonged to the city's past, and brought them here. The spot is cobbled with Italian lava blocks, which were brought here by Italian merchants in the 1800s as ballast on the ships. The gazebo in front of you belongs to this area, but originally in the early 1900s it was behind this yellow fence. In the 1800s, such wells were created by the locals to get water. And it's a popular place among the locals for a photo shoot. Story says it that the statue was brought here from the cemetery. In 1936, the Soviets destroyed the first Christian and the first Jewish cemeteries, which appeared in the early 1800s. They bulldozed over the cemeteries, but the order was given to use statues which decorated the grave sites to decorate the old town. And here are the locks. And of course, when people put a lock, they write their name on it. Irina and Siroja. And now I'm heading towards this mansion, which is known as the Shah Palace. And you may wonder, why does it have such a strange name? And in which way can it be connected with the Shah? The mansion was built in 1851 by a Polish architect for a Polish aristocrat. But that Polish owner never lived here. He rented it out. And in the early 1900s, a person who rented it was a Persian Shah who fled the country, who fled Persia after the revolution. He was a big philanthropist. He spent here about 7 years and gave the palace its name. Here's the entrance to Gogol Street. We've done a virtual walk of the street. You can look it up on our YouTube channel here. So we won't go there. My plan is to head that way, which is the extension of the old town, another area of the historic quarter, but much more off the beaten path. Today this mansion is privately owned, In 1990s, after the breakdown of the USSR, lots of historical buildings became private property on a condition that the new owners would restore the facades. So it's privately owned and used for commercial purposes. You may be wondering why the mansion has been designed like a castle. The answer is very simple. Look, the bay is down there. The distance from the edge of the cliff to the mansion is just a couple of meters. The ships which were sailing into the harbor in the old times could see a castle on top of the cliff. The trees were small and people could get a clear view on the mansion. And that's the impression the architect wanted to produce. A random sculpture of a bear. Just some sculptor decided to design it a couple of years ago and put it here. And people's apartments with a view at the Black Sea. Quite nice. All the trees you're seeing were planted after the city's founding. These are old acacia trees. In May, Odessa is called the blooming city because of the blossoming chestnuts and acacias. And this spot becomes very beautiful, and you can smell acacias here. If you're not allergic, May is probably one of the best times of the year to visit. So here are these 3 buildings which I showed you at the beginning, but I'll tell you about them later. What I want to show you here is this monument, which in my opinion is the most interesting and the most strangely looking monument in the old town. And you can try to guess what that is. Something round. A man is standing there holding something. Let me zoom in. It's put on wheels, pulled by horses, and there's something on top. The name of the monument is the Monument to an Orange. And there's a very interesting story behind it. Odessa's founding was very much sponsored by the Empress Catherine. She died when the city was 2 years old. Her son became the Tsar, and he disapproved of Odessa's project. So the city stopped receiving the money from the capital. The port was still under construction. The trade was very slow, so it really needed the money from the empire. The city's administrator was called to St. Petersburg, and he knew the Tsar pretty well. He knew what he liked and disliked, so he recommended the locals to send a Tsar a gift. 3,000 best oranges. Oranges were a very rare fruit at that time. The Greeks, who were among the city's first settlers, delivered the oranges from Greek ports, put them on carriages, and managed to bring them to St. Petersburg in the winter very quickly so that no fruit got spoiled. Upon receiving the oranges, the Tsar felt all respect that people of Odessa paid to him, and a couple of days later decided to change his mind and gave Odessa a 250,000 rubles loan. It was a huge amount of money at that time. So oranges saved the city. In many ways, oranges were a bribe. And the second name of the monument is the Monument to to a bribe. So over there you see the Russian Tsar standing in an orange and holding an orange. And an orange is put on something which is like a carriage. And a carriage is pulled by horses. And now let me tell you about these three ugly looking buildings. They were built in 1970 by the local Black Sea Shipping Company, which was the largest shipping company in all Soviet ports. And at that time, they became the tallest buildings in the city center. And the first ones with an elevator. And the children who lived in this neighborhood, they came there to get a ride on the elevator. Locals call this building the posters to communism. Why? Because on top, up there, close to the roof, on each building, there was written Lenin, party, people. And all the ships which were sailing into the bay, and here's the bay, so could see that written Lenin, party, people, and that's why the locals call this building the posters to communism. And getting an apartment in such a building in 1970 was a luxury, because it was a new building with a sea view and right in the old town. Here are the wheat silos. And the bay. This boulevard is named after an Odessa-born writer and a comedian, one of the most prominent Odessa citizens. In the summertime, you can see here elderly people sitting on the benches or walking with their grandchildren. There's one more interesting story connected to this area. You've probably heard of the writer named Chekhov. Chekhov was one of the many Bohemians who visited Odessa in the 1800s and 1900s. During one of his visits, he came here to check out on an orchard and a small house which were here. The orchard consisted of different kinds of fruit trees. Later, that orchard was sold, and the new owner of the private property destroyed the orchard and built here houses with apartments to rent. The orchard which was here served as a prototype of the orchard which was described by Chekhov in his famous play. The thing which the local administration has been doing is putting such garbage containers. They actually go under the ground, and they look much nicer in the old town than those large containers, which also smell and stink in the summertime. This is the beginning of street which is called Trading Street. 4 blocks up the street there is the oldest market which is called the New Bazaar, and that market gave the street its name. a Soviet heritage to put plaques on the buildings if famous people live in these buildings. And there's a decorated Christmas tree over there. And a cat. At some point in the future, we'll continue exploring this part of the old town. But for today, our time has run out. Thanks for tuning in. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel for the updates. More virtual walks will be uploaded next Saturday and Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.